emailed minutes on 2-3, 2-5, 2-7, and 2-10. We can do that as a group, I believe. If there's, yes, Representative Neighbor.
So that we have more time for discussion, I would move that we approve the minutes for 2-3, 25, 2-5, 25, 2-7, 25, and 2-10, 25 as written.
Thank you. Is there a second? Representative Riley seconds. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? No? Okay, motion passes. The minutes are approved. Okay, next on the agenda, we're going to have a hearing on HB 2311. Jesse, are you ready to go over HB 2311? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, committee. Jesse with the Reviser Statutes Office, and I'm going to provide a quick briefing on House Bill 2311 as introduced. What House Bill 2311 does is it proposes a new section of law that would prohibit the Secretary for Children and Families from adopting, implementing, or enforcing a policy for the selection of a person as an out-of-home placement or for custody for adoption or for appointment as a permanent or a sole custodian or for licensure under Chapter 65 that would require a person to affirm, accept, or support a policy regarding sexual orientation or gender identity that may conflict with that person's beliefs. 2, prohibit selection of, if otherwise eligible, a person based on such person's beliefs regarding sexual orientation or gender identity. And then subsection B is the section that states that subsection A shall not be construed to 1, prohibit the Secretary from considering the beliefs of a child, the child's family, or the community in relation to a person being considered for selection when determining if such placement, custody, or appointment is in the best interests of the child. Or 2, shall not be construed to prohibit the Secretary from making selections as otherwise required by law. Lastly, the section would allow a person aggrieved by a violation of the section to recover actual and punitive damages, allow for injunctive relief, and recovery of costs and reasonable attorney's fees related to actions. The section would become a part of the revised Kansas Code for Care of Children, and if enacted by the legislature and signed by the governor, it would become effective upon publication in the statute book on July 1, 2025.
Okay, committee, are there questions specific about the language in the bill for the reviser? Any questions for the reviser? Seeing none, thank you, Jesse. Okay, so we are going to do proponent testimony first, and then we'll have opponent testimony, and then we'll have neutrals, which I have no neutrals on this bill. I'm going to ask that conferees limit their remarks to about 2 minutes. 2 to 3 minutes, but not longer than 3 minutes, because I will cut you off. Okay, just for the sake of hearing the bill and taking action possibly on it if the committee so chooses, I want to leave time for that. So first up in the proponents is Lance Kinzer. Welcome to committee, Lance. If you'll introduce yourself and tell us the organization.
Sure, thank you so much. My name's Lance Kinzer. I live in Olathe, and I'm here on behalf of First Amendment Partnership, an organization that exists to promote the social value of religion, and particularly in relation to that today, very interested in protecting and preserving the rights of people of faith to serve. I'm just going to describe the legal background and context for this bill. In other words, why is Kansas and in a number of other states considering legislation along these lines this session? You know, traditionally, courts had recognized that attempts to disqualify parents from being licensed or approved to foster or adopt based upon their religious beliefs created significant First Amendment challenges. There's one current federal U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals case, a Third Circuit case, Lash versus New Jersey Division of Children Protective Services from 2002 that found essentially just that when New Jersey took a foster family that had been fostering for 10 years and said that because of their beliefs about marriage, family, and sexuality, not merely were they no longer the appropriate placement for some particular child, but rather they were completely ineligible to foster or adopt at all, that violated their First Amendment rights. There's a number of cases, for sake of time, I won't run through the cases that reach reached that similar result in the past. More recently, there are a line of cases where the results have been more mixed, and there's one case right now, the Bates case, pending before the Ninth Circuit, where a single mother who was looking to foster and then potentially adopt was disqualified because she could not assent to the state's view of sexual orientation and gender identity. She was required to do that. Again, not to say that she was the best placement for any particular child, but rather simply to say that she was eligible to foster or adopt at all. My view, and I think the view that this bill supports, is the notion that Kansas should welcome a diverse range of adoptive and foster parents with differing views on a whole host of issues, including sensitive issues of sexual orientation and gender identity. And while every individual placement should always be made consistent with the best interest of the child, we should never say that a person with normal course views on these issues should be ineligible to foster or adopt at all in Kansas, or that they shouldn't even be considered for particular placements. Rather, particular placements should be decided based upon the totality of the circumstances. So the reality is that there's a fair amount of litigation on this issue right now, and that litigation's coming from places like Oregon, Washington, California, Vermont, Massachusetts, and that's not Kansas, but those same issues that are occurring there could certainly occur here, and I'm probably at 3 minutes at this point is what I'm gathering. Okay, well, I'll just say thank you so much to the committee for letting me speak today, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you. And we'll have questions at the end of the proponent testimony.
Thank you so much.
Next, we have Nathan Bruns. Introduce yourself and who you represent today.
Thank you for hearing my testimony today. My name is Nathan Bruns. As stated, I'm State Director with Lifeline Children's Services here in Kansas. Also, we are a national child placing agency in 19 states, but also do pregnancy counseling with crisis pregnancy counseling in all 50 states. And so I submitted my written testimony. I'll just make it brief. It's that we are here today to support and be a proponent of this bill. To echo a little bit of the testimony just given by the gentleman before me, is that having the opportunity for families to choose and have the opportunity, the right to choose their religious belief or moral belief when it comes to this said bill, I believe sets us up to care for more children in our state that are in need. Quite frankly, right now, where our foster care system is, no one can deny that there isn't a great need to care for children, and to widen that opportunity for families to step into that space, specifically those that have from a place of faith that have a conviction about said matters, I think it does not just serve the people well, but more importantly, it serves the children in need well. And so with that being said, we thank you for having this bill put together. Lifeline does not do foster care or licensed foster homes in the state of Kansas, but we do work with families in equipping and training specifically through the local church to make sure they're able to do wraparound care for said families in the foster care field. So we thank you, and I'll stand for questions at the end.
Thank you. Next is Stacy, is it Chick or Cheek? Chick. Welcome to committee.
Thank you very much. My name is Stacy Chick. I'm here as a private citizen. I have submitted my written proposal or my written words, but I'm just going to share with you today. I'm a mom and a wife of 22 years. We have 7 children, 3 biological, 4 adopted through foster care in the state of Kansas. I'm an educational advocate and a licensed trauma-informed care practitioner. Today, in foster care, we face an alarming reality. We're at risk of losing foster families left and right. Without the protections provided by House Bill 2311, we send a message to people of faith that their beliefs disqualify them from caring for children in need. This is not only a loss to families, willing to open their hearts and homes, it's a loss to every child in our system. I want to highlight 2 key reasons that this legislation is essential. First of all, foster parents focus on meeting a child's most fundamental needs, trauma and reunification where possible. When our first placements came to us, they were 2 and 4. They could not speak. They were not potty trained. One of our son had chewed off his finger and his head was misshapen due to neglect. Our focus was not our faith. We are devout Catholics. That might surprise people who know us best. Our focus was helping them heal and meeting their most basic needs. Maslow's hierarchy of needs: food, shelter, clothing, safety, warmth, rinse and repeat every day, 24/7 for 5 years. That was our life with our children in foster care. We had frontline trauma work. The reality is that there's an adage. This is the second reason I want to highlight the need for the bill. It takes a village. My village just happens to be my faith community. When we were in the trenches of trauma work, the only people that were there to support us were the people of faith surrounding us. When it was too hard to even make it through the day, we were provided for with casseroles and coloring books for our kids to make everything a little bit lighter. We find ourselves at a crossroads. Families who are firmly rooted in their faith will be driven away from being foster families if they are discriminated against, as they have been in other states. I would ask you to heartily consider House Bill 2311, ensuring that no foster parent or agency is forced to affirm or comply with ideological mandates that conflict with their sincerely held religious or moral beliefs. It doesn't limit the ability of the state to consider the best interests of the child. Rather, it actually prevents children from sleeping in offices and not having safe homes that they can be living in while they are working to reunify with their parents. Kansas foster children deserve safe and loving homes, and they deserve stability. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next is Todd Chipman. Todd, welcome to committee.
I wish to thank the House Child Welfare and Foster Care Committee and Representative Humphreys for considering our perspective concerning Kansas children. I represent the Masters Community Church in Kansas City, Kansas. Your work for children and families casts a long shadow across Kansas, affecting multiple generations in each legislative session. I sometimes wonder what legislative committees were laboring in the Nebraska unicameral in 1971 when I was adopted as an infant. I grew up in a healthy family that enjoyed the support of a faith community. That community, in essence, adopted me. Their values and convictions made sense and shaped me into the man I am today. I have worked to pass the blessing of a safe and healthy home on to children in foster care. My wife and I are the parents of 5 bio children and have adopted 2 from foster care. As a pastor, my faith community rallied around my family, and as we took in 2 failure to thrive, abused and neglected children into our home in 2016, members of my faith community have mentored, taught, encouraged, challenged, comforted, trained, supported, and supplied my adopted daughters just as they did my bio children. So overwhelming was their support that I was compelled to write a book, Until Every Child is Home, published by Moody Publishers in 2019. And I tell stories of faith leaders who have fostered and adopted and how their convictions have met the needs of vulnerable children. The faith community in which I was raised, the faith community that I lead, and many other such congregations offer loving support to families welcoming children into their homes. The individuals and families that constitute these communities sincerely hold their beliefs. This is the first of 2 reasons why I beseech this committee to pass HB 2311. Suppose the Secretary were to require an individual or family of faith convictions to compromise those convictions to serve the state by caring for vulnerable children. In that case, the Secretary implicitly compromises that individual or family's commitment to their faith community and a vital support network. Second, as has been already testified today, suppose the Secretary was to prevent otherwise eligible individuals or families from fostering or adopting simply because said families wish to maintain their sincerely held religious beliefs, the sincerely held beliefs that are a part of their social network. This is simply an argument from supply and demand. The demand for foster families is high. Why cut a large supply chain by excluding those with religious convictions about sexuality and gender from serving such a great need in the state of Kansas? Thank you for your work and for hearing us today.
That was perfect. Like 1 second left. Good job.
Thank you.
Your timing's good. Okay. Next is Tiffany Applegate.
Good afternoon. I'm Tiffany Applegate, and I'm honored to be an adoptive mother. I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak with you guys today in support of House Bill 2311. I've been intimately involved with foster care and adoption for over 20 years. We have 3 adopted children, and it has been one of the greatest honors of our life to raise them next to our other 3 children. I can't imagine if that opportunity had been taken from us simply because of our religious beliefs regarding sexuality. According to bipartisanpolicy.org, over 65% of foster and adoptive families come from foster families attend church services weekly. Research from Barna shows that practicing Christians are twice as likely to foster and adopt than the general population, and are more likely to welcome sibling groups, older youth, and children with special needs. These are the children that are hardest to place, and it's the people of faith that are most likely to step up and meet this need. These are families like ours that believe we are called to care for vulnerable women and children, even if it's hard. Families that are following the call of a Christ to lay down our lives, pick up our cross, and follow him. That means we step in the gap, love these children, and help them heal. And our biblical view of sexuality and marriage does nothing to impede this calling. Let's look at the statistics and the costs of excluding Christian families simply for their religious beliefs. There are close to 6,000 foster children in the system in Kansas at any given time. And according to reports, there are less than 2,500 foster families and places to put these children. That means that there are children that have been rescued, are hurting, and have nowhere to go. They're sleeping in offices, hotel rooms, or being left in dangerous situations. Now imagine if 65% of our foster families are Christian and are no longer allowed to receive placements or adopt because of their beliefs. That means we're only going to have approximately 875 families to care for these children. That means, can you imagine if it was your child that had been taken, was scared and alone and sleeping on an office floor? Can you imagine how they would feel if they didn't have a safe bed to go to? We already have a shortage of families, and as I mentioned, research shows that Christians are twice as likely to foster and adopt than other families. So why would we do anything to exacerbate this issue? We need to find a solution for the shortage of families and to help these kids, but it's not by eliminating good families through religious discrimination. If we allow families to be denied placement simply because of their strongly held religious beliefs, these precious children are the ones that are going to pay the price. So I'm asking you to please support HB 2311 and protect foster and adoptive families from religious discrimination. Thank you.
Thank you. And our last proponent is Brittany Jones. Welcome to committee, Brittany.
Representative Howerton, members of the committee, thank you for having me today. I'm Brittany Jones. I'm the Director of Policy and Engagement for Kansas Family Voice. We care deeply about ensuring our laws protect the conscience right of Kansas families who want to follow the biblical command to care for children in need through the foster and adoptive systems. But we also care deeply about children in need in general, and we want to make sure that there are places that whenever they are in need, that the places they can go, and we want to ensure that families are not being excluded simply because of certain beliefs they might hold. As has been said multiple times already, there are a staggering number of children that are waiting for a forever home, who are either transiently in the foster care system or waiting to be adopted. And I won't go over the numbers again because you've heard them several times already. But we also know that many of the families that have become a foster family or have agreed to go through that program, have been licensed, have sincerely held beliefs. Their biblical faith, their Christian values, their Judeo-Christian values, so it doesn't just apply to Christians, it can apply to many different religions, have compelled them to care for these children. As a Christian myself, there are many points throughout the Bible where it talks about how we are to care for widows and orphans, and so these families often feel a biblical call to care for these children. And so why would we want to utilize their Christian belief to care for children, but then reject them for another belief that they might hold. And so this bill is not about saying that a child has to go to a home that is not the best fit for that child. This doesn't direct the secretary how to place children. This doesn't direct the secretary or tell the secretary they have to place a child in a certain home. All it does is ensure that there is not a preemptive bar to these families being part of the foster or adoptive care system. We've seen this in other states. One of the prior conferees went through several of these cases, and I'm happy to talk about more of those during questioning if you'd like. But we know this happened in other states. We also know that there have been times the current administration has issued either temporary rules or other rules that don't directly impact this, but would implicate and might convey to a family that they're not welcome because of the Christian beliefs. So we simply are asking that you pass this bill in order to preemptively protect these families, ensure that going forward, families that are looking to adopt or foster know that they will not be absolutely barred because of their Christian faith, and so that we can continue to encourage families from our churches and from other faith arenas to enter the foster care system and care for these children in need. The only children, or the only people that are really harmed by not passing this law are children in need. And so I ask that you pass HB 2311 out favorably, and I stand open for questions at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other proponents in the room that wanted to testify? Okay, seeing none, we'll go to questions for the proponents. Questions for the proponents, committee. Representative Page.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. For those of you who have adopted children, did you adopt someone who their sexual orientation was different from yours? And how did that work? Because I don't remember hearing you say that you had adopted children like that. And I was just wondering, have you, and what was that experience like? Because if your belief is one thing and it kind of goes against what they're doing, how is it working?
Is there someone who anyone can address it, either proponents? Okay, Stacy, right? Stacy? Yes, if you'll come up to the microphone and reintroduce yourself for the record. Thank you.
Stacy Chick, private citizen, adopted 4 children out of foster care. To answer your question directly, I have not adopted anybody who has a different sexual orientation. However, if there's somebody else who wants to speak to that, they can. But I will say that I think in practice, there is a very concrete principle at play here, and that is that when we very first went to foster, my mom said, well, what if you get a kid who's a terrible match? What if they burn your house down, right? Okay? Or they hate Jesus, any of those things. And I said, well, Mom, we roll that dice when we have biological children as well. And we just have to deal with that. We have to just parent with whatever principles that we have in order to love that child well. So that would be, for me, one of the things that just can maybe speak to that a little bit, even though I don't have the personal experience. But from our perspective and those other foster families that I do know, is that they live their principles in the same way they would with any child who is in their family. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Other questions? Representative Carr? Do you have a specific conferee?
No, I don't.
Okay,
And this
go ahead.
may even be a better question for our revisor's office, but after hearing testimony, I just want some clarification with respect to the religious and moral beliefs. Is this exclusive to, is this particular House Bill 2311 exclusive to just the religious and moral beliefs regarding sexual orientation, or is that religious and moral beliefs in general?
Jesse?
Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair. It is for religious and moral beliefs regarding sexual orientation or gender identity, and limited to those 2 items.
I think that answers my question. Thank you.
Other questions? Representative Owsley?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I was taking notes here. The first conferee had no Kansas court examples that I heard. The second conferee said they were national and no Kansas ties. We heard from 3 private citizens. Two of them said they were surrounded by faith in their experience, so nothing without this bill was hindered. The Tiffany Applegate, I'm reading your testimony here, and it says you've been intimately involved with foster care and adoption for 20 years. Is that experience in Kansas?
If you could come to the microphone. And then reintroduce yourself as well. Thank you.
I'm Tiffany Applegate, and I am an adoptive mother. My experience is only in Kansas. We did not foster and adopt through Kansas, but we are living in Kansas currently.
So would the claim that you've been involved for over 20 years apply to Kansas?
Only in the respect that we are living in Kansas and we have a family with adoptive children while we're here, yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any further questions? Committee? I think I have one for either Lance or Brittany, whoever would like to address this. We've received a lot of opponent testimony, a lot of written testimony that's, and a lot of it seems to center around discrimination. Does this bill discriminate in any way? How would you answer that?
I would say this bill was designed to prevent discrimination based upon religious beliefs. So first of all, it's important to note that this bill is actually content neutral with respect to what the religious belief might be pertaining to sexual orientation and gender identity. So there are a wide range of folks within religious communities who have differing points of view on that issue, and this would protect folks across the spectrum with respect to their beliefs on this issue. Now, we know that the way the litigation is played out and the way that the policies that have been adopted in other states tend to disfavor and discriminate against people with traditional views around marriage, family, and sexuality. But one can imagine a scenario in which people of faith with progressive views on marriage, family, and sexuality might be discriminated against, and this bill is viewpoint neutral in that regard. What this bill says is that you can't be told you're excluded completely from the system simply because of your religious beliefs, because you won't affirm an ideological position that the state has taken on these issues. It furthermore says that we won't have a per se rule that you can't even be considered for a particular placement, but it still says at the end of the day, with respect to every particular placement, the best interest of the child controls, and the department has the ability to consider the totality of the circumstances, including everybody's view, the affected child, the affected family of origin, the family that's potentially fostering or adopting, their views on these issues to determine whether a particular placement is the best fit. So the discrimination that's being protected is any kind of discrimination against someone for a sincerely held religious or moral belief regarding sexual orientation and gender identity, which unfortunately is happening in a lot of states, hasn't happened yet here in Kansas. But the final thing I'll say in answer to the question, I think it's responsive, and it goes to, I think, some of what's been said previously, is that anytime a foster family is unsure as to whether their views on a sensitive issue are going to be looked askance at, that they're going to be viewed as somehow, maybe an inappropriate, that they have an inappropriate view, that's going to discourage them from participating in the process. And so many folks that we talk to who help people get through the home study process, who are engaged, even in states that haven't had problems, have said it's incredibly helpful to us to be able to tell families at the outset, your views around these issues, your religious beliefs, are not going to be able to be used to exclude you from the process. You can know that going in, and that encourages more people to participate. So my basic answer would be, not only is this bill not discriminatory, it in fact directly prohibits religious-based discrimination, and it protects people with a variety of views on this sensitive issue.
Okay, Representative Humphreys.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so I think maybe this would be great for you too. Thank you for being here. So because of what you just said, what does the bill address what the Secretary of DCF or any of the other grantees, that's not what they're called anymore, when they're making a decision on where to place a child, what's the standard of how they could choose what family's going to best
Right.
work for that child?
So this doesn't change the ability of the department to have the exact standards that, as I understand it, they have right now with respect to what an appropriate placement is. It does say you can't establish a rule, a policy that would preclude someone from being licensed or authorized to foster or adopt based upon their sincerely held religious beliefs. And it would also say that you couldn't have a per se rule that before even getting to the point of matching with a particular child, you simply say, well, you're licensed and authorized, but you aren't sufficiently affirming, therefore we're not going to consider you for any actual placements. But once you get past that protection, the bill leaves the secretary completely free to make each individual placement decision consistent with the best interests of the child. The amazing thing about the policy in some of these states, like Oregon, Washington, Vermont, for example, is that not only do they say, like conceivably, if my wife and I were to decide that we were going to foster, maybe they would say, hey, you're not the greatest placement for a 17-year-old gender dysphoric kid. I might disagree with that, but maybe they would make that determination. But the policies that this prevents against would also say, and have said, are currently saying in other states, I can't foster a 17-year-old kid who goes to my church, who 100% shares my views, simply because I won't affirm some abstract government policy on this issue. And that's what we're trying to prevent. And that's why I think the testimony that goes to the issue of how restrictive this would be on the pool of available foster parents is really the key. So to summarize, it doesn't impede the ability of the secretary to make, in the actual placement, individual child to a family, totality of the circumstances, best interest of the child, taking everything into consideration can still apply. But we're not shunting people out of the process, excluding them from the process to begin with, simply because of their sincerely held religious beliefs. That policy is so radical that I think when some people hear about this bill, they actually think it must be doing something else. It can't really just be dealing with that issue, but that is what's happening in other states, and that's why this is necessary.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, so just to clarify in my mind what you just said,
Yeah.
this really has nothing to do with the child, because all of this takes place before they even know about a child in placement. This is just being considered.
So to be clear, much of this would be completely separate, because where a lot of this takes place, and typically if you look at the cases that are being litigated, there was a case out of Washington where you had some grandparents who were attempting to, their own grandchild was in foster, and so there was a particular child that was in view. But in the vast majority of these cases, what's really in view is someone is going through the home study process, they're going through the process of becoming authorized or reauthorized to foster and adopt, and without any particular child, not in view, the agency is simply saying, we're not going to authorize you, we're not going to license you to foster and adopt because of your religious views on issues of sexual orientation and gender identity. That's most of what the bill does. The bill also says that having been authorized, as you're just being put into the process of we're looking at matches, we're not going to have a per se rule that says, oh, this person answered a question in their home study this way, therefore don't consider them for certain types of placements. Rather, it's going to just say, consider them in the totality of the circumstances as you would everybody else, but you can take into account views regarding sexual orientation and gender identity as they apply to the moral beliefs or views of a particular child or that child's family of origin. So most of what it does goes to your first point. And on the second point, it simply says kind of no shadow banning of them with respect to mere consideration for placements, but ultimately the final decision to place is based upon the same standard is right now, it's an appropriate placement based upon totality of the circumstances, best interest of the child.
Representative Barth?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think this question might be for you as well, Mr. Kinzer. Can you kind of give us an idea of how do you even know that you have been discriminated against as a foster family due to your own personal religious conviction?
Yeah. Well, in many of these cases that are being litigated, it's actually just extremely clear because they're basically being told by the state, hey, you guys, we're great on everything, but this one question we asked you, we kind of have some concerns about the way that you answered it. And so they're able in the litigation. Now, there could be cases where maybe the agency is a bit more subtle and you're like, how come I didn't get approved? And you have no idea. But there are enough of these cases where, particularly there are some instances in states where they have a reapproval process. And so people who've been completely fine forever, now all of a sudden, the only thing that's different is that there are these 3 new questions, in the home study about your views on this issue. Or oftentimes, and this is right at the beginning of the bill, the states are actually saying, here's a statement regarding the state's view with respect to sexual orientation and gender identity. You have to say that you agree with that or you're not eligible. That's actually where a lot of the litigation develops. So usually they know because they've been pretty direct in just telling them, that's why we're excluding you.
Is it brief? 1 second?
Yeah.
Representative Page.
Thank
Briefly.
you. You're so kind. I appreciate that. Sir, you sound like you've dealt with a lot of these cases. Can you give us some examples of people who had these strong religious beliefs, who adopted someone with maybe their sexual orientation and gender was different from theirs? Can you cite some cases where it worked?
Well, one of the things to be aware of is that there's nothing in this bill that would stop the Secretary from saying that someone's views on, say, gender dysphoria are so in conflict with a particular, say, teenage child that we're not going to make that placement. But anecdotally, I have heard of many instances where people, either with adoptive children or with their own biological children, have differences over these issues. And one of the really interesting things, the Vermont case that's being litigated right now, Vermont's own experts indicated that in many instances, parents who have traditional religious views on marriage, family, and sexuality can parent kids with different experiences, different gender identities even very well, as long as they'll just do some of the simple things that were actually talked about with respect to the prior conferee, which is to provide a safe, loving home in which there's open conversation about beliefs and differences. And I think sometimes we get hung up on the notion that people with a particular sexual orientation and gender identity, like that's all they are, but we're all just human beings, every one of us, and so we all bring a whole wide range of kind of experiences, beliefs, and there are plenty of people who have positive relationships with parents who disagree with them on issues of sexual orientation and gender identity, on other religious-related issues. And so what I would say is these cases, interestingly enough, in fact, none of these cases involve a situation where it's a kid saying, hey, I was placed in this terrible family that doesn't, nurture me because of my sexual orientation and gender identity. All of these cases are involving circumstances where someone's just being told, you can't foster or adopt anybody because the state disagrees with your views on sexual orientation and gender identity. And that's what we're attempting to prevent.
Representative Carr, do you have something? Is it brief? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Should be brief anyway. So these questions that you say are disqualifying questions, are these questions that are like currently included in the Kansas home study? Are they currently there, or are we talking about something that is not in Kansas at all?
Yeah, to the best of my understanding, Kansas is not excluding anyone right now from eligibility to foster or adopt based upon their sincerely held religious or moral beliefs. And so in that sense, this bill simply preserves the status quo. And I would say, I guess, in general, for opponents, I mean, you should be bringing legislation that says, no, we should be discriminating, against people based upon their religious beliefs. If you really think this is problematic, because what this does is, for the best of my understanding, it locks in what Kansas is already doing to prevent things that are happening in other states from occurring here. But opponents, opposing this is just opposing the status quo. They should really say what they believe, which is that the state should discriminate, potentially believe that the state should discriminate against parents based upon their sincerely held religious beliefs around sexual orientation and gender identity. Kansas doesn't do it now, and it shouldn't do it in the future.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm going to stop questions for the proponents. We're going to move on to opponents. And first, and just a reminder, 2 minutes, no longer than 3 minutes, okay? And there are more of you, so if you can keep it closer to 2.5, that would be amazing. First up, and I apologize if I mess these names up, is it Riha? Rija. Okay, Khan, welcome to committee.
Sir Chair and them committee members. My name is Rija Khan, and I'm speaking in opposition to HB 2311. Now, I know I started by using the incorrect pronouns and title for you all, but that was just to show that those are my moral beliefs that are different than yours. Now, you may not like it, but again, you don't have to interact with me after this because we are not dependent on each other. Unfortunately, the kids that are in the foster care system, they do depend on their foster care families and their guardians. They do not get the privilege to leave that room or leave that house to go find somebody else, to be in a house where you will be rejected or you know that your values on your sexuality and gender are not going to be accepted is it's a level of harm that you cannot undo. Those kids have already been rejected from their families of origin. And in my testimony, you can refer to it, but I cite that last year in April, there was over 6,000 kids in foster care. And we don't know how many of them do belong to LGBTQ+ communities, but this is harmful. And to clarify, in no shape or form am I saying that you should not allow parents to foster based on their religion, because there are religions such as Satanism that exist out there that do believe in other things, that shared value of who you are, and they should have the right to foster. But at the end of the day, it should never be at the expense of a child losing their identity. For those kids out there, they should know that they're accepted and loved in these communities, and we are doing the work to come speak against these bills. And if the goal of this bill is to allow the secretary to not discriminate against people based on religion, then this bill needs to be written better, not as is it currently, as it is not clear enough, and it is so broad that we are hearing that there is litigation happening in other states. And lastly, I will say, a thing I heard was there was a lot of cases regarding discrimination and people not being allowed to foster, but at the end of the day, there were other people saying that most of the people that are fostering are Christians. So I wonder what's incorrect. Whom are we discriminating against as a state, while those people are the ones that are fostering the most? But with that, I urge you to oppose, and thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you. And this is Kansas, and we do allow proponent and opponent testimony, but being offensive is usually not a good way to start. We want to hear your side. That's why we invited you here. So thank you very much. Next up, we're going to recognize Chloe Chafin. Hopefully I got that right. Chaffin. Butchering names. I so apologize for that.
No, it's okay.
Welcome to committee.
Thank you. Chair Howerton and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I feel very deeply connected to the child welfare system. Both my mother and her mother before her are adopted. My mother has spent more than 2 decades running the nursery of the church in Overland Park where I was raised, where I volunteered every Sunday and for many cycles of VBS. I formerly worked at a daycare in Stillwell, and I'm now finishing the last bit of my certification process with Douglas County CASA. I hope to become a foster parent one day when I have the space. I have worked with and known countless kids in the foster care system. The state has a clear vested interest in ensuring every child has a roof over their head, no doubt. However, child safety is incomplete until psychological and emotional safety is considered. I'm a former queer kid myself. I say that not because I grew out of my queerness, but because I feel so lucky to have made it long enough to become a living, breathing queer adult. That means something as someone who for many years did not think I was going to let myself get that far. Kids need the state's protection from all forms of neglect and abuse. Allowing them to be placed in homes with foster parents who will invalidate their queerness and seek to change and fix what is not broken only compounds existing traumas and risks dangerous mental health crises. I was the queer kid whose mom read my text and rushed me to the Johnson County Mental Health Center for emergency services when I was 16. I knew that my family and my faith community were safe people on this matter, and yet sometimes, even existing as a queer person in this country and this state feels impossibly hard. I am a born and raised Kansan, and I will live and die here too. No amount of frustrating bills will ever take my home away from me, and yet the legislature's priority over the past few years on targeting queer kids has been exhausting. I only very recently officially came out to my mom at age 22. I figured she knew, but it was still so hard to say. I only told her on January 28th this year, when I was crying in my car in the parking garage across the street after attending the hearings on SB 63. Because the truth is, as much as these types of bills will do harm when they are passed, the constant barrage of transphobic headlines signaling that your government does not believe you or love you enough to keep you safe is already doing harm right now. Every bill given a hearing is a trade-off and an opportunity cost. It breaks my heart to see that this is what the legislature likes to spend so much of their precious few 90 days on. As I called my mom that day, so drained by it all, I heard her voice break as she asked me where I was and if I was safe. I reassured her that this was not that kind of call, and she gave me her favorite line, "You know it's my job to worry," because that is what a good, safe, and loving parent does. It is hard to be a kid. It is hard to be a person. It is hard to be queer. It is hard for kids to grow up in foster care. There is no reason we can't choose to lead with kindness and protection instead of compounding the pain of their hardest moments. I feel so lucky to have the support I have. Please vote no and see to it that everyone else gets the same that I have. There are so many wonderful foster homes out there, and I know we need more, but we still need to make sure that queer kids are placed in safe and accepting environments. Foster kids are already an exceptionally vulnerable population, and if we want them to grow to be confident, happy, resilient adults, we need to reject HB 2311. Queer acceptance is the most basic safety planning we can offer these children. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, Laurel Birchfield. Welcome to committee.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Laurel Birchfield. I'm the Advocacy Director with Mainstream Coalition. Mainstream was founded over 30 years ago by local faith leaders to protect the separation of church and state. We advocate for religious freedoms, and that means we advocate against the overreach of government into our religion, as well as religion into our government. Unfortunately, House Bill 2311 is the exact kind of bill that Mainstream was founded to fight against. This bill weaponizes so-called religious freedoms to discriminate against LGBTQ plus Kansans. It privileges extremist religious beliefs regarding sexual orientation and gender identity over the well-being of some of the most vulnerable Kansans. This bill does not preserve the status quo. It preemptively prevents the DCF secretary from acting in the best interest of an LGBTQ plus child, and instead would require that they give equal access to a non-affirming family to house a queer youth. It also opens a new door for lawsuits brought by families if they feel that they are denied a placement if it wasn't in the best interest of the child. Your proponent testimony argues that this provides more homes for children in need. If that were truly our concern, we would instead be talking today about reevaluating the 2018 statute that allows agencies to discriminate against LGBTQ plus families when placing children. If we truly care about the well-being of children, we would look at Section 1A2 of this bill. This section permits custodians to guide or instruct the child in alignment with their faith. Now, we don't object to families of deeply held religious or moral faith housing families or housing children in need. But we do object to allowing that custodian to care for these children with dangerous anti-gay rhetoric or other anti-gay programming such as conversion therapy in an attempt to change that child's gender identity or sexual orientation. At best, this is willful negligence. At worst, this is state-sponsored child endangerment. There is no ban on conversion therapy in our state. Right now, there is a House bill that would essentially ban conversion therapy by healthcare providers. But this has made no progress in this legislature, even though we know this to be a harmful, unethical practice. The gender-affirming care ban has been vetoed by the gender because of the harm it will cause to our trans youth. But this legislature continues to signal that it is a priority to pass that bill. Overwhelmingly, the majority of this body has shown that they do not support or believe our LGBTQ+ families when they stand up and tell you that you are hurting them. You'll hear from more of them today. And you need to be listening to them when they tell you that these are things that are causing them harm. Instead, we continue to see so-called religious freedom bills that prioritize extremist beliefs and imposes them onto every Kansan through state policy. Religious freedom is a powerful right guaranteed to us by the First Amendment and our federal and state religious freedom acts. But it is being used and abused to advance a dangerous subset of Christianity that many Christians and people of faith do not believe. Religious freedom does not guarantee that we are allowed to use religious beliefs to harm others.
That's 3 minutes.
Please oppose this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Andy Connolly. Welcome to committee.
Hello, thank you. Got my timer to hopefully help me out. And there goes my pen. That's okay. Hello, sorry, a little nervous. So my name is Andy Connolly. I am a full-time resident of Lawrence, Kansas, native here. And I speak in opposition to this House bill. I am a foster dad. I love and cherish my LGBT kids that I house and regularly volunteer with. Many of these kids come from homes that do not properly feed them, educate them, or respect them and their body autonomy, which is something I hear very frequently. Further compounded, many of these kids come from homes where their identity or orientation are not respected. They are scared. I know a kid who has good reason to believe that they were denied to live full-time with their sibling because when that sibling's adoptive parents found out that the kid was non-binary, they denied having them live with them. I worry that this bill would worsen things. If a foster parent chooses not to respect the child's identity, it could draw the child further down in hopelessness and emotional unavailability. If Kansas representatives vote for this bill and pass it, I have this to say for any foster kids listening right now. I love you. If you are in my house, I will love you for who you are and who you want to be. You will be asked to do the dishes, to take the trash out and eat my buttermilk pancakes. But rest assured that not everyone in this world wants to put you down and disregard you for who you are and your ability to love who you want and your identity. I will fight for you in whatever form that will be. When you are in my house, you will be home. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Brianna McGew. Welcome to committee.
Thank you. I'm still recovering from Chloe's testimony a little bit, which I think kind of makes my point more powerfully than I ever could. My name is Dr. Brianna McGew. I'm an assistant professor of social welfare at the University of Kansas, specializing in LGBTQ mental health. I have years of experience working in the child welfare system. I'd like to note that I'm speaking today in a personal capacity and not on behalf of the University of Kansas. I'm speaking today because I am profoundly concerned about the impact that this bill could have on the mental health, well-being, and placement stability of LGBTQ foster youth. I'm also concerned about the impact that this bill could have on caseworker burden, as well as the child welfare system at large. I'm most concerned about the aspect of this bill that forbids adopting policies that prohibit selecting placements because of religious or moral beliefs regarding sexual orientation or gender identity. Most importantly, the bit that says intent to guide or instruct a child consistent with these beliefs. Rejecting caregiver behaviors, including attempts to change a child's sexual orientation or gender identity, which seem very much protected by this bill, have consistently been linked to increased risks of suicidality, substance use, depression, anxiety, and a range of mental health concerns. The impacts of these rejecting behaviors can be all the more severe when compounded by previous trauma, which unfortunately all too often children who are entering the foster care system have seen. Rejecting behaviors are also linked to placement instability. Placement instability is a severe concern both for individual youth, but also the foster care system writ large. Placement instability is linked to worse mental health, behavioral health, and academic outcomes for the child, but it's also linked to increased financial costs, administrative, and worker burden for the child welfare system. Even if we're allowing individual caseworkers to make decisions to safely place LGBTQ youth, considering their sexual orientation and gender identity, this is still a very flawed approach. Firstly, in many cases, LGBT youth do not disclose their sexualities or gender identities out of fear of their safety. Secondly, many youth enter the foster care system or other child welfare placements before they come to know what their sexual orientations or gender identities are. These factors make it almost impossible for caseworkers to consider sexual orientation and gender identity in many cases when making placement decisions. Furthermore, rather than having institutional policies that ensure that placements are safe places for LGBTQ youth, this is putting the burden of safety on individual caseworkers, a factor that can contribute to stress and burnout among these caseworkers, overextending an already overextended workforce. In sum, unsupportive homes compound trauma for LGBTQ foster youth, worsening mental health and placement stability. Furthermore, this approach puts unfair burden on caseworkers and the system as a whole. We have a duty to the care of children in our custody, and I take that duty very seriously.
That's time.
So I urge you to vote against this bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, Ashley Balza. If I got that incorrect, please correct me when you announce yourself.
You actually got that correct. Thank you. Hello, Chair Howerton and members of the committee. I want to thank you for allowing me to speak with you today, and I would ask that you please read and refer to my written testimony, but I will try to get straight to the point. First, this bill sanctions discrimination against LGBTQ+ children by allowing them to be forced into environments that reject their very identity. It's not protection, it's a recipe for isolation and heartbreak. Second, by prioritizing adult beliefs over children's needs, this bill betrays the trust we have to act in the best interest of our most vulnerable citizens. It is a betrayal of their safety and well-being. Third, I want you to imagine being a child in foster care, already feeling lost and alone. This bill would allow for them to be placed with families who don't accept them, condemning them to a life of rejection and pain. We must not inflict this suffering on our children. Fourth, this bill uses religious freedom as a cloak to justify discrimination against children who need love and acceptance. It's not about faith, it's about using faith to hurt those who need our protection. Lastly, by allowing unnecessary litigation, this bill diverts resources away from caring for children and towards defending discrimination. We should be investing in their futures, not in lawsuits that harm them. I ask you to stand together against this bill. Let us choose compassion over discrimination and love over rejection. Our children deserve nothing less than our unwavering support and protection. I urge you to oppose HB 2311 and stand up for our most vulnerable. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next is Taryn Jones on WebEx. On WebEx, are you there?
Yes, Madam Chair, I'm here.
Oh, and I skipped Elise. I'll come back to you. Go ahead, Taryn.
Madam Chair and members of the committee, my name is Taryn Jones, and I am here testifying in opposition to HB 2311 as the Policy Director of Equality Kansas. My current job is Policy Director of Equality Kansas, but my training is actually in social work. One of my first jobs out of college was working in the child welfare system doing family preservation. For those of you who don't know, family preservation is a program where we work with children in the parent's home to prevent foster care. Unfortunately, that's not always successful. And while it is sometimes needed, we should remember that taking children away from families isn't something we do lightly. Being involved in the child welfare system, whether that be family preservation or foster care, is traumatic, especially for children. Taking children away from their families is incredibly difficult on children, and when deciding where to place children or who to adopt out to, all factors should be considered. This bill states that a person's religious and moral beliefs can be a deciding factor in licensing of a foster parent or part of a decision in placement, but in the same breath talks about the best interest of the child. So which is it? You can't place a child who's LGBTQ with a foster parent who has moral objections to the community and then have it be in the best interest of the child. So my question is, what happens when DCF decides not to place an LGBTQ child in a foster home where the family does not believe in affirming the child's sexual orientation or gender identity? The bill states that the best interest of the child could be considered, but that you cannot deny a foster parent because of their religious or moral beliefs. What happens when those things conflict and DCF is forced to choose the child's best interest? HB 2311 is a poorly written bill that contradicts itself and opens the state up to lawsuits when they are considering the child's best interest in placement, as they should. Placing an LGBT child with an unaffirming parent to avoid lawsuits is state-sanctioned child neglect. I am in opposition to HB 2311 and ask you to vote no on this harmful bill. Thank you, and I stand for questions.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to jump back to Elise Flatland. I apologize for going out of order. Welcome to committee.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Howerton and members of the committee. Thank you for allowing me to speak on opposition testimony of House Bill 2311. I am a volunteer with Equality Kansas, and I am also a mother of 4 children, 2 of whom are transgender. I oppose HB 2311, a bill that I believe could cause harm to children like mine and to children across Kansas who are simply trying to be themselves in a world that isn't always kind. Being transgender isn't a choice or a trend. It is an inherent part of who they are. It is a small part. Like every part, it is essential to the sum of who they are. Imagine the nightmare my children would face if placed in a home that does not accept them for who they are. If they were to be placed in a situation where someone believed their gender identity was part of some evil conspiracy, the trauma they would face would be catastrophic. My children and children like mine already have to navigate so much pain in their lives in a world that often doesn't understand them or accept them for who they are. These are children, not political pawns. They are human beings who deserve to be treated with dignity, respect, and compassion. If this bill passes, we are setting up an environment where the safety and well-being of transgender children will be put in jeopardy. We are telling them that their identity is something that can be disregarded when they can be placed in homes where they might not be welcome or understood. No children should ever have to feel that they are less than or that they must hide who they are to be accepted. I urge you to think about children who will be affected by this bill, the children who need us to have their backs and not turn away from them. If HB 23 passes, it would put the lives of vulnerable children at risk. It creates an environment where people who care for these children, caseworkers and social workers, may fear the legal consequences of making decisions that are truly in their best interest. Children, especially those in foster care, need to know they will be placed in homes where they are loved and accepted, not where they are subjected to further trauma because of their identity. If this bill passes, I fear that many children will be placed in homes that do not offer them the support they need and deserve. I fear that transgender children would endure further trauma because of a political decision that has no place in making decisions about their care. Thank you.
Thank you. And last, for the opponents that I have listed, Rabbi, and I should know this, I am so sorry, Modi
Good. So far, so good.
Ribert.
Reber.
Rebert. I knew I was
Reber with no T at the end. Reber.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair Committee. I'm Rabbi Moti Reber. I'm the Executive Director of Kansas Interfaith Action. We're a statewide multi-faith advocacy group that works with a number of the mainline denominations in Kansas, as well as individuals of faith, the Jewish community, individual Jews and Muslims, and people of faith and conscience throughout the state, and I'm standing in opposition to HB 2311. So the legislature has been attacking LGBT kids this whole session. Tomorrow morning, there's going to be an override, tomorrow morning or the next day, whatever, there's going to be an override of SB 63, which is the comprehensive gender-affirming care ban. So you'll forgive me if I don't give this bill the benefit of the doubt. I would hope that this committee of all committees, child welfare, would be more concerned with the well-being of children than with a pursuit of culture war issues. Up to 30% of children in foster care are LGBTQ+. They may have been rejected by their families of origin for that very reason. It is responsible social work to make sure that they are not placed with people who think that their very existence is sinful. They could be subjected to mistreatment, such as conversion therapy, or even sort of manipulative and abusive praying for you. I will also say that this bill is meant, since we know from the testimony of the proponents that there actually is no policy of religious testing for potential foster parents, that I think that this bill is intended to protect the most extremist Christians who are the most kind of hostile to LGBTQ folks. We hear a lot about the rights of extremist Christians, but like every other right, it only lasts as long as it doesn't infringe on somebody else's right. Not being able to ask a potential foster parent about their attitude toward their potential charges cannot help but lead to a situation where children are not supported in their full identity or are even abused. This is framed as a religious freedom bill, but we see it as yet another front in the legislature's ongoing war against LGBTQ+ children. Anti-trans bills, pronoun bills, now religious discrimination bills. It seems like an obsession with this legislature. KIFA has been fighting these bills every step of the way because we believe that LGBTQ+ children are beloved children of God, deserving of affirmation and a supporting of loving environment. The legislature has done enough damage to LGBTQ+ people and children throughout our state. Let's not add this on top of it. I ask you to vote no on HB 2311. I'll be happy to take questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you. Questions for the opponents committee? Representative Humphreys.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't know who to ask this question of, but maybe Laurel. Yeah, that would be great. While you're coming up, I'm kind of shocked, I guess, about is it seems like the opponents have sort of just forgotten Section B of this bill, because Section B is very much saying that this doesn't prohibit the secretary from taking into consideration a child's biological family beliefs or the child's beliefs or even regarding sexual orientation, and that the secretary should do what's in the best interest of the child. So it seems like to me that would be put the child in a home that affirms those beliefs or actions or whatever it might be. And so I feel like we've just sort of left that part out because that's what this is about. Like, let's fit the foster child to the foster family.
Representative, Madam Chair, thank you for that question. I agree that Section B does protect the child. It's unfortunate that it's Section B and that it comes after all of the language that preemptively prevents the secretary from instating policy that goes further to protect that child, and then it creates a lawsuit.
Would it be your preference that the secretary could not give a family a license because they don't affirm someone in their sexual, that their religious beliefs believe differently than probably what you believe about sexual orientation or gender identity? You think it would be better for the secretary to just X out all those families that believe that?
I think that if the family intends to act on those beliefs in a harmful way, then it does not benefit the child to be placed in that household. And unfortunately, there is a section in this bill that does allow that.
Okay, so if I may, yeah, and this will be my last thing, just to follow up. But if you isolate and discriminate against all of those families that aren't going to affirm, that's just we have heard a huge chunk of families that aren't going to be available to other, the 70% of the 70% of the children in foster care that don't identify that way. I mean, we heard from Andy. It's great what you do. I so appreciate that you make buttermilk pancakes for your foster kids and all of those things. But they're placed with the right person, it seems like. And so I don't understand why you would want to just eliminate this whole other section of folks that could also be placed with the right sort of foster children, why you would discriminate against them from being able to be foster parents, and to say that that whole group, we already need more foster parents. So I don't know why we would want to discriminate against a group that is going to be helpful to 70% of the foster kids.
Madam Chair, to be clear, I don't believe that we should be discriminating against anybody who wants to house a foster child or a child up for adoption. Again, I'd love for us to revisit that 2018 statute and open the door for our LGBTQ plus families who want to house those children. I don't think that we should discriminate against anyone, but we should have policies in place that protect children from acts of those custodial families that would harm them.
And no one is keeping an LGBTQ family from being a foster parent, or that 2018 statute, that's perfectly still legal to do that.
Does,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, it does allow agencies to not place a child.
If it's in their sincerely held religious beliefs, but there's many other most every other agency can. I mean, I don't know which ones don't and which ones do, but there's a lot that can do whatever. So I don't think it's really harming. Anyway, I'm kind of shocked about not taking Section B into consideration, but thank you for the dialogue.
Thank you for the question.
Representative Page? This question is for Chloe, and if you can, is your mic on?
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
And I know you want me to hurry up, so I got it.
Thank you.
First, I want to say thank you, because that was awful bold of you to come up and state your case. Mm-hmm. And I just want to make sure I heard you clearly. You said when you came out to your mom, or one time they sent you somewhere to the hospital because they thought you needed some help when you were dealing with your own identity. So did I hear you clearly on that?
Yeah, I'm originally from Olathe. Actually, my parents live in Representative Esau's district. And I went to the Johnson County Mental Health Center for emergency services when I was suicidal when I was in high school. And it was related to, thank you, struggles with my queer identity. And I actually think that I have the benefit of the church that I grew up in. I knew queer members of my congregation. And so when I was really little, I thought it was some people just happen to marry a man. Some people happen to marry a woman. And I didn't put anything on it when you're a kid, right? But then as I grew up and I started hearing from a wider community, including from government and everything, that's when some of the I think what really gets me is that there's a lot of assumptions, a false dichotomy that you can either be a person of faith or you can be queer, and obviously that's not the case. And it's only until when you get older that you start to feel the weight of the world and that stigma creep in. So it's hard even when you have support. And so I'm not saying that religious people should not be able to foster and adopt, but if they aren't willing to say that they can have their private beliefs and put that aside for the care of the child, that becomes really dangerous. And to the point that was made in the previous question, I also think that it's important to note that I'm 22, and only a couple weeks ago did I finally have the courage to tell my mom. And for many kids, especially younger children, they're not gonna know that about themselves yet. So when we're trying to match people, that's still a concern, because it's very scary for kids in the foster care system to be able to come out with that information when they're already going through so much trauma, and many of them will shut down. So they're not always gonna be forthcoming with that information, which is why we need to protect. And one other thing I'll raise is that with my training as a CASA, I think it's important to say that when you adopt that child's yours. But for many kids, we need to remember that their permanency goals are reunification. And so especially if they're in a short-term setting, it's really extra important that they feel affirmed. And as was also raised, some of these kids might be in the foster care system because of conflict with their family about their identity. So it doesn't really help them to put them in another family that will not similarly be affirming.
Are you at the same church? Or are you
no, I live in Lawrence now. So I grew up in Olathe, went to school in Topeka, now I'm at grad school in Lawrence.
Thank you. for your boldness, and hope everything works out.
Thank you. Thank you for time.
Other questions, committee? Representative Owsley.
I don't have a question, but I wanted to tell Chloe, thank you for your efforts as a CASA as well. Important service needed in the state, without a doubt. And then I just wanted to acknowledge the 44 other opponent written-only testimonies for their time also.
I think there's actually 53 written and then plus our oral. Is that right? Yeah.
So 62 opposition altogether? 53 written only? Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. No other questions. I have one question, I think. So I heard a lot about the LGBTQ kids in foster care. Is there any examples of them experiencing, I don't know, issues with their home or placement that anybody knows of in Kansas today? With their, okay, being placed in a home where religious is a problem? Okay. Thank you. So with anything else, I'm gonna close the hearing on HB 2311. Representative Johnson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Given this is one of our final days, I move to suspend the rules and to declare an emergency and advance House Bill 2311 to consideration for final action of the committee.
Okay, so that is, it requires 2/3 vote of the committee, and we can vote that. I did give you all warning, so don't say I sprung this on you. We've been talking about hearing this bill for about a week and a half, and asked you to read it and to brush up on it and make sure you had all your questions and amendments in. So with that, I'm going to have a vote on the motion. I need a second by Representative Humphreys.
Is it a debatable motion?
Is it debatable? We'll let our reviser answer. I'm going to say it's not debatable, and we'll just vote. So all those in favor of suspending the rules and going into emergency action and working HB 2311, vote aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. No. The ayes have it. Motion passes. So we are going to open up discussion. Yeah, oh yes, you can. Representative Owsley would like his vote recorded as nay, and so would Representative Page and Representative Carr. Okay, so we're going to open up discussion on HB 2311. This is the time that we talk about it as a committee. So state your cases, ask your questions, and if you have any amendments, offer them at this time. So we are open for discussion. Is there discussion on the bill? Any thoughts? Representative Page.
I know I'm in the minority. I get that. And I just don't think we should do this to these children. I find it hard to believe, and I'm a Christian, and I know a lot of people in here say they're Christian, and I just find it hard to believe that you could not try to change the kids. If that's what they want to be, that's what they want to be. And I just find it hard to believe that you would let them come in and not try to change them. And that's not fair to them. I taught school for 30 years. I've seen kids that supposedly were in Christian homes, and it didn't work out well. And I've seen them do bodily harm to themselves, and that always frightens me, because I don't want to see any kid hurt themselves. And then I hate to see them get hurt by adults who say they're there for them, and it's kind of hard to believe. I didn't know about cutters until I couldn't figure out, sweetie, what's going on? And she told me, and I said, well, have you talked to my parents? She said, that's the problem. And I didn't know what to do. I just reached out and asked if they would talk with her and see if they could work it out. But they didn't, and the child ended up running away. And I'm not saying that's every case, but we see these kids are hurting. They need some help. And like I said, I'm not knocking Christians. I'm a Christian, but I try to have some love and some compassion. And I'm not trying to change anybody. If that's who you say you are, that's who you are. I want to meet you where you are, and let's go from there. We share a common bound. I have 2 nieces. We love them to death. But that's what they chose to do. We love them. Bring your friends. Let's do this. We're family. And if we're not there for them, they're in trouble. Because the world definitely is not there for you. And I think they deserve some support. So that's why I think we should leave it alone and allow these kids to get the help that they need and be with somebody who's really going to be there for them and not try to conform them and change them.
Thank you, Representative Page. And I do appreciate your passion and care for kids. And I love kids too, and I don't want to see anybody hurt. So I'm going to ask you this question. What part of the bill are you addressing? What part specifically says that? That will hurt? Okay, so that talks about before they're ever placed with this is just consideration on whether they can foster. It has nothing to do with placing a child. No, you're good. I just want to make that clear. Okay, Representative Burkamp.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, how I look at it is if you're filling out a form online, it's a checkbox that says if you don't agree with this ideology, you're disqualified. So instead of 1,000 people, narrow it down to 200. But I think the way our discussion's been, there's kids all over the spectrum, and we want that full pool of candidates because we can still match up. I think kids from, A to Z with families who match their beliefs. We're just trying to keep that pool as big as possible in my mind, without disqualifying from the very start. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Representative Carr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I always find it interesting when this particular topic comes up. I can remember just today walking in the committee, and there were, people here. This was Black Legislative Day. There were people here, and I made the statement that this would be a good committee to come in because this is the only committee that I know of that is usually doing something right. It's usually helping the kids out. And that's why I'm here. I'm here to help the kids. Personally, I may not agree with the lifestyle. In fact, I can't even say that I really support it because I don't understand it. However, to me, this is just punishment. And it's and what we're doing is we're punishing the least of us, and you'll say that, oh, well, this just puts people on the list. It gives us a larger list to work from. Well, I'll say this. If I'm hungry and you have spoiled food, don't offer me spoiled food to say that it's going to do something for my hunger, because that's not the food that I want. That's not the food that's going to nourish me. And who knows what the outcome might be if I partake in that food. We heard conferees testify that this hasn't even been an issue. So my first question is, why are we even addressing it if it's not an issue? If it's not something that we're purposely doing in an effort to hurt people, and I have a real problem. I have a real problem when those people that we're talking about are kids. They've already been through enough. They've been through situations that many of us couldn't even understand. But here they are struggling, trying to get through life. And then to even put someone in a pool so that they have the opportunity to attempt to change them, to attempt to modify them, to attempt to make them something that they don't believe that they are. I don't know how they might turn out, right? But they don't believe that they're this way at this particular time, and to put them in an environment where someone could potentially attempt to change them when they're struggling with so much more. I think that this is, a real disservice to this committee that normally, in my opinion, does good work. But this one, not just no, but no. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Okay, Representative Roser.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to preface for people who are attending or watching this stream who maybe don't know who we are. My name is Angel Roser. I represent Manhattan, the West Side District. I am a graduate of Kansas State University in Human Development and Family Sciences, and I spent a majority of my life in foster care. And so when it was asked, if any of us understood, I very much do understand the system. And so I want that social lens to be brought to the picture in this discussion. It was asked by another conferee if there was a faith-based family who has taken in a child that identified other than heterosexual. And my family is one of those families. We have a non-biological legal placement for in our home who is not of the same race and not of the same sexuality. And in our family, we know, not we think, but we know that he is beautifully and wonderfully made by God. We know that. He is loved by our family. And I want to distinguish the understanding or put out the understanding that not every family can differentiate between what they deem as sin and what they call as loving the sinner. And so that is what we are called to do. But in my firsthand experience, I know that there are good families who are able to foster these children without any type of discrimination. And in their moral compass, the first thing that we do, at least in our home, we love God and then we love people. And in that order. And so for me, as a child who went through the system over and over and over again, in emergency placement, in respite, in family-based homes, there are never going to be enough family-based homes. And when you're paired with a sibling who is 6 years older than you, there's nobody who wants a kid like me. Or they do, but they don't want the attachment. And my older sister is perfect. She is 10 times the woman that I will ever be. And so for this bill that, where we can make amendments in the future, that maybe those children who identify differently don't get placed in those homes, I do want to say that I think there's a lack of clarity in the sincerely held religious or moral beliefs, because that could be deemed as subjective, where there is room for growth in this bill. But to lessen that pool for me, as someone who, faith-based or not, deserved a family, I deserved one. My older sister, who was a teenager in the system, deserved a home. I couldn't agree more with the other conferee who said, we need family-based care.
And this legislation, in my interpretation, does not necessarily mean that our vulnerable youth have to be placed with those homes. So thank you.
Further discussion? Representative Owsley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have to express my disappointment with this hearing held here today in child welfare. The name of the committee is Child Welfare. The question was asked earlier that this has nothing to do with the child. This happens ahead of time in the screening. And to Representative Bergkamp's question is checking a box. It's not checking a box in the state of Kansas. We have 7 proponents, and not one of them could give us a Kansas example of a need for this. 2 of those opponents used the word suppose and imagine. It was mentioned that Christians are 2 times more likely to adopt. Members of the LGBTQ community are going to be more likely to adopt overall, period. And bills like this and bills like Senate Bill 63 are going to tell that community that they're not welcome in our state. So, and to declare an emergency to pass this out with 62 opponents, with only 6 proponents, we had no frequent flyers in this committee that address child welfare on a regular basis or an expert level basis in this committee chime into this conversation. I've heard the child advocate report a few years in a row now, and I cannot recall a single complaint coming through from a foster parent not being placed. When I heard that, you know, as I was reading proponent testimony ahead of this committee hearing, I had to wonder to myself, how many of these kids come into the system? We heard 30% of our kids in state custody are members of the LGBTQ plus community. And I had to wonder how many of them came in because of their parents' sincerely held religious beliefs, because I bet that that's a number. I'm disappointed with us today, and I have a clarifying question for the reviser. In the best interest of the child still takes precedent in our statutes, regardless of what this committee says here today. So if the Child Welfare Committee is going to put foster parents' sincerely held religious views in front of the child's best interest today, statute still upholds the child's best interest.
I will say that for the Secretary's selection for an out-of-home placement, adoptive placement, custody, or appointment of permanent or sole custodian, the Secretary is directed by the best interests of the child.
And then I have to ask too, what's, this allows the family to sue the Secretary. Can you explain to me a little bit more the nuts and bolts of that? If a family felt like they were discriminated against because of their sincerely held religious views, is this, what kind of action is this?
So subsection C says a person aggrieved by a violation of subsection A. So a violation of subsection A would be for the Secretary to adopt, implement, or enforce a policy for selections as an out-of-home or adoptive placement or custody for adoption, appointment of as a permanent or sole custodian, or for licensure. That would require a person to affirm or accept or support any governmental policy regarding sexual orientation or gender identity that may conflict with the person's sincerely held religious or moral beliefs, or to adopt, implement, or enforce a policy that, adopt a policy that does not prohibit selection, appointment, or licensure of a person because of such person's sincerely held religious or moral beliefs regarding sexual orientation or gender identity, or intent to guide or instruct a child consistent with such beliefs.
Clear as mud.
So what you're saying is they can seek, I don't know, whatever, they can sue, I guess, because they weren't chosen or they weren't able to go get a license because of their sincerely, but it doesn't have anything to do with placement. There's a divide because it's just Section A.
It's just Section A.
Right.
You know, subsection C doesn't say who the action shall be brought against. It does state that a person aggrieved may recover actual and punitive damages and injunctive relief, which would to stop the action, cost and reasonable attorney fees. And the specific language would be that adopt, implement, or enforce the policy.
If they were denied, basically.
Madam Chair, I'm compelled to make a substitute motion to table House Bill 2311. We're 7 minutes past our scheduled adjournment time on an emergency motion, and we have yet to have a Kansas example of a need for this. And I am not comfortable with the language read right there. So if it was appropriate, I'd make a substitute motion to table 2311.
Is there a second?
Second, sorry.
Representative Page seconds. Is that debatable? It is not debatable. Okay, so all in favor of tabling this indefinitely, which means it cannot come up again, is that correct? We would have to have a motion to pull it from the table. Next year, not this year. So all those in favor of tabling the motion, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. Nay. The nays have it. So we are back in discussion. And a motion would be appropriate whenever discussion. Representative Johnson.
Thank you. One of the issues I think is important on this bill is this is a starting point. We have endeavored to get information, get people, and I have enjoyed reading some of the materials. But it also deserves to go before the floor because that is the entire body. And that gives everyone a chance that does wish to put an amendment into it, time to look at that. It gives other people time to contact us as legislators. So I would hereby move that we pass House Bill 2311 out favorably.
There's second. Second, Representative Barth. Okay, all those in favor of passing it out favorably, say aye. Aye. All those opposed, say nay. No. The ayes have it. The bill is passed. Is there anything else for the committee today? Oh, record the votes. I apologize. No votes for Representative Page, Representative Owsley, and Representative Carr. Those could be recorded. Thank you for reminding me of that. Okay, anything else for the good of the committee? Okay, with that, we are adjourned.